it's another risk factor. At least the insurance companies, some of them say we don't want to work or insure anybody in the medical field because they're riskier than some other types of industries.
Yeah, it's, we call that supply chain in the IT industry is kind of, what other vendors are you dealing with? What data of yours do they have? Are you responsible for it or not? I know when I go to medical offices, I'm typically signing a form that's like, hey, my wife's allowed to see my records and you're allowed to share my records with, other medical offices. Or maybe it's a one-off thing where I'm working, I'm going to a lab and I'm filling out a form saying, yeah, it's okay to share my data between the lab and the doctor. And I wonder, maybe this is a question for a lawyer, unless you have any insight on this. I wonder where the liability ends, right? Like, because if the data is created by the lab and then shared with the doctor, do they both have shared liability, like a shared responsibility around that, I imagine? Or
You know,
or can they point fingers at each other? You know
that's a
what I
good
mean?
question.
Yeah.
Yeah, or if you've got all their information with the lab and they send it to you, and then you have the data breach, now the lab gets sued. Can the lab come after you?
Yeah.
Well,
Typically, I'm sure there's chain of custody, laws there that get involved with, who's responsible for it. I know that when we work with our clients to share out sensitive data, we have this thing called data loss prevention that DLP for short. Data governance is another term that's used. And it's the idea that ideally you want to be able to maintain, if it's data you created, right, you're initially responsible for it. And if you have to share it with another party, how can you maintain governance as you're sharing it out to where you can even revoke that, right? We're not quite there yet with a lot of the systems people are using. We use Microsoft, which has some of those capabilities built in, where you could even share out information and have it be eyes only, where they can't even download a copy, and then that sharing expires over time. And then, if I really want to jump to the future, we have blockchain technology that does an even better job at chain of custody and who can see what and when, how, and where. But I think that's good to consider too. Is it's what vendors are we working with, and have we vetted their security as well?